In this video, I'm going to just briefly touch on titrations, which we will not focus on in this class as much in order to spend more time with buffers. But titrations are basically a way that we can determine the concentration of something very accurately through an acid-base reaction. So if we do not know the exact concentration of either an acid or a base, we can add the opposite. So if I don't know the concentration of an acid, then I can add a base with a known concentration until I neutralize it completely. We often use indicators. So we have a color change when we hit pH 7, when we've neutralized all of our acid. And in this case, this one's looking at phenolphthalein. And so when it's acidic, it's clear. And when it's basic, it becomes bright pink. So we add base until we see that consistent light pink color, and that tells us we've just reached a point where we have reacted with all of our acid. And that allows us to use the volume of base added to calculate what that original concentration of acid was. And when we do that, if we know the concentration of our base, and then we learn experimentally what volume of base it was required to neutralize our acid, we can calculate the number of moles. Now, if our mole-to-mole ratio between our acid and base is 1:1, like many of the reactions that we've looked at, similar to like hydrochloric acid reacting with sodium hydroxide, then once we know the moles of our base, we actually know the moles of our acid. Now, this is the powerful piece of this, is that helps us calculate that concentration, because the molarity of our acid is going to be equal to the moles divided by the liters, so the volume. So if I combine this moles of acid with a knowledge of the volume of my acidic solution, I can calculate the molarity. Here's a way to visualize that in a slightly different way that's a little bit less linear. So typically I know the volume of my base that's added, I know the volume of the acid I start with, and I know the concentration of my base. So my volume of base I find experimentally. Before I start my experiment, I measure the volume of my acid, and I use a known base. So I have this concentration of base known already. So I use these two pieces of information to calculate volume times molarity, the moles of my base right here. And then I can do a mole-to-mole conversion to my moles of acid. And then I can calculate the molarity by combining the moles that I calculate of my acid and dividing them by the volume of my acid I measure before I started my experiment. And this is a way that we as chemists calculate and experimentally determine the exact concentration, like out to 4 significant figures, of an acid or a base.